Yeah. So moving online, that's been the biggest thing, Matt. So obviously, uh, big changes have been happening. I've been talking a lot about trying to move into a place where we can kind of look at what we can bring back from this time of being almost all online, and like what's some crazy new ideas we could have, right? So, what have you been seeing?
Well, when we were talking about this before, it was like we were talking about how you could easily, when we come out of this, we could easily default back to what we were doing, right? And how youth group has just ultimately changed. But one thing I've learned from this is that you have to be super intentional now with everything you're doing. My youth group's not huge, so it's like at least big enough where I can still kind of reach and contact most of my kids without the help of my leaders. I mean, most of my leaders are college students, so and they've all had to go home and stuff like that. So haven't been able to. They've been jumping on some Zoom calls once in a while, but they're all trying to cram in their final assignments and stuff. But aside from that, it's like I've really learned how intentionally you have to be with everything. Like last night, for instance, we did a small group with our girls where we did a baking night on Zoom where we sent them a list of ingredients to get, and they all set up with their iPads or computers in their kitchens or phones or whatever they could get connected to, and basically they went through the ingredients step by step and baked cookies together, just in between making conversation. It was funny because even the parents, because like most kids are like, most junior high age kids, like they probably should be operating an oven. I know they can operate a smartphone, but like cooking's dangerous for the man.
You can't burn yourself on WhatsApp.
Yeah,
You
like
can get
there's no
into a lot of
purpose.
other trouble on your phone, but you won't burn yourself unless
No.
you're using one of those old Galaxy phones that were exploding on airplanes.
Oh yeah, where you hook them up.
That's a time of life that we quickly forgot about. Those times where those phones that were in your pocket were starting on fire while you were hurling through the air like a couple miles up at like 1,000 kilometers an hour in a giant bomb, basically.
Yeah, half of our youth kids weren't even thought of then. Oh man. But yeah, I've just I've just really learned now, even with like my boys and stuff like that. It's just like, and you have like, I don't know if anybody else is struggling with this or struggled with this when they first went into it. Like Zoom calls are so awkward, man. Like you upload them and you're just sitting there and you're all looking at each other and you're vulnerable because it's like that's your office. Like some of us were at home. We're not in church offices or anything like that or going to work. It's like you're at your home, they're in their home. Like you get to kind of be a little more insight into your student's life too. And like when you start those Zoom conversations, like they're all just looking at you like you're supposed to have something like magical to teach them, or this just like you're just gonna start going, right? And then they're just like looking at you like, so what are we doing? It's like, oh man.
We're all
So
staring at the screen for the next hour. That's what we're doing.
yeah.
The same thing
So
you'd
that
be doing on your phone, just not, with any purpose. But
yeah.
but it is somewhat awkward, right? Like I think that and what I'm starting to notice, at least for even my family, like is that the novelty has run out. Not that it was new to teenagers. Maybe they weren't really using Zoom, but maybe they were using, Discord or FaceTime. Like this isn't new to them. But just in general, the whole move of everything being online, that first 2 weeks, like my grandma was phoning me on FaceTime for the first time. My mom was learning about Zoom. I don't talk to like me and my sister get along, but would never FaceTime each other, but we FaceTimed each other
No.
a couple of times. Like it was like suddenly we thought that we were at the end of the world and we only had one more chance to see each other's face. But the novelties weren't off now. Like people are like the term is zoomed out, right? So we've
Oh
just
yeah.
had enough. And like I get it because my whole day, I'm not as zoomed out as some people. I'm an extrovert like you wouldn't believe. And I currently am in my bedroom slash studio slash video game playing station slash my gym where my rower is literally almost touching my bed. And like everything else that's happening in here, like I don't leave this room. So for me to be able to still Zoom people is like a big deal. But for most people, it's just like the novelty's gone. We're kind of like, okay, like this isn't the best thing anymore. But I do think that that type of novelty loss may start to leak into our plans of what we're going to do in the future for ministry. like maybe, this isn't fun anymore. I can't wait till this is over. Let's get rid of Zoom and let's just meet in person and never go online again.
Yeah. But at least with that, you could take the traits of like I said, it's like you're intentional with like everything you're doing. Like I find now I'm prepping more for these Zoom calls because I'm like, okay, this is what I want to discuss. I want to keep the conversation rolling, or like, get these guys connection. But the beauty of like our youth group culture is that like a lot of these guys were friends beforehand too, before they even started coming to youth. So it's like they're just excited to see each other the minute they hit the ground rolling. So we've been lucky in that sense. But at the same time, I was like, it's made me really think of like, wow, it's like we're capable, my wife and I are capable of like doing ministry together, from the comfort of like, doing our home things. And you kind of mentioned in your blog post too, like you're saying like, oh, what if we only met every other week and did like Zoom small groups instead of meeting in person, just because like you've mentioned like kids going to hockey or soccer or whatever. Like we want to give those kids on the fringe, because I have a lot of kids in my youth that like I call them seasonal students, because they only come around when hockey season's over and like lacrosse is starting, or like soccer's midweek and hockey's always on the weekends, right? So it's like it's hard for those guys to get connected. With those guys, I had to like there was a real personal relationship involved, but then I was like, oh man, like I need to have that personal relationship with all my students. I can't just like pick and choose when it comes to like the kids that are not making it to youth group as much. Whereas like now I'm learning so much more of being like a shepherd, I think. And like it's really been really cool seeing how God works in this situation, because like I feel like I'm living out more of my calling now, even though this pandemic's happened. It's teaching me so much more about being a pastor, because it's like our job is people and we want to lead people to Jesus and lead people to the gospel. But like what we forget about is like Jesus only had 12 disciples, right? And he only had a small group to deal with. And I was like, I don't know about you guys, but your capacity on a Zoom call is like 12 people is when it starts hitting chaos, right?
Yeah.
Even above that. So it's like, you're like, oh man, you're pulling all these other things out of the Bible that you never thought you'd pull out before. You're like, when he did his teachings, right? Jesus never worried about like the sound quality, or like if is like if the crowd that he was talking to, even if he was feeding the 5,000, whatever, like he never worried about all these like logistics. Whereas like when I found youth ministry before, you're getting into your space, you're like, oh, is the sound good? Is the band good? Like for my retreats or speaking or whatever, like mics, technology, like I feel like that kind of like muzzled a lot of things. And now it's just like this is like getting to the roots of everything. Like we're like, oh well, we're just doing raw teaching now. It like doesn't matter about what games you have, who's like leading small groups, your questions, things like that. It's like it's all on us as leaders and pastors now to like push that ball forward of teaching. And like now that my students are in a space where it's like they're not worried about what are the people thinking about how they dress or how they act in the crowd, it's like I've seen my students have so much more growth, just as individuals, being like, oh, I'm going to read my Bible. Why? Because I have time. We're going through this little lesson right now where we're talking about Paul and his prison letters, right? We're like, Paul changed the world from sitting in a prison cell. Imagine what you could do from sitting on your bedroom with a Zoom call. Like
from the prison that is quarantine.
Yeah, it is. Like, well, the only reason I use prison is because actually I FaceTime. Like, I'm like being from Johannesburg, South Africa originally. We were FaceTiming with our friends and family back there, and their lockdown is like much worse. Like, they can't even leave their house, like to even
Martial
go
law,
on walks.
basically.
Oh yeah, it's terrible. Like people are getting ticketed if there's more than one person in a vehicle. You can only go to the grocery store. Like my cousin, he's a pilot for South African Airways out there, and they've went bankrupt. So like he's not even going to have a job out of this. So it's like things were looking very grim. So it's like we were trying to like as family come together and like encourage them, because like we really can't do anything short but just pray for them and encourage them, like saying things are going to be okay. But it just got me the school of thought, being like, you know what, Paul in prison, like he only had a piece of paper and a pen, or sorry, a piece of paper and whatever he could write with.
Yeah, whatever they were. Did they have fountain pens in prison 2,000 years ago?
He's actually just biting his nails, scribbling in his own blood, probably. But like, that's still
That's
overthinking it. I know, but I'm just thinking, man. I was like, that guy had like the worst circumstances, right? And he still was able to do effective ministry. And it's like we look at this and we're like, oh man, they've taken away our space, our culture. our everything. Like, how do we do ministry? And I know a lot of guys are like, they're scrambling too. And we've just really been like in this, like, like you just got to thrive in the chaos. I feel like it's stretch or starve at this point. And we've now seen this like transformation. Like I have students that were like Instagramming me and messaging me even afterwards, being like, hey, are we still doing Youth Friday? Like, how's youth going to work? Things like that. So I was like, oh, like at least these guys are like, they're still hungry for it and they're still willing for it, amongst all the change. And so we knew right away we had to just keep that ball rolling, and whatever we had to do. We started out with YouTube. I hate filming myself and like talking in front of a camera. I'm sure everybody does, but like I particularly hate the sound of my own voice. I think there must be a disorder for that. But like,
I think that's most people actually. When they hear themselves, it's like, oh, is that me?
yeah, and it's like you're guilty of comparison, right? Because you look at all these other people that have been doing this for a long time, right? These like even these Instagrammers and YouTubers, these influencers, like why are these kids wanting to listen to what I have to say when they had so much content in front of them, like between TikToks and whatever they could and Snapchats and all that. Like you're just like, what's gonna make me so special? But you realize that, like, boredom is your best tool, I found, in this situation, because these kids have watched all the TikToks that they can and all the YouTubes that they can, that at the end of the day, even though you may be their last resort, they're like, it's that familiarity, and they're hungry for to learn, I think. Plus, like, when I'm talking to some of my students, they're like, oh, I only have to do an hour of schooling a day. But like, what do you do for the rest of the day? And their parents are like, they're trying to kill us. You're like, no, they're bored. So it's like we're releasing our teachings like midweek instead of trying to put like a Friday or like a weekend package together, because that way, like, they have something through the week to go through. And like, it's the same with our small groups. Instead of like trying to package everything on a weekend, it's like, oh well, let's disperse it through the week. So then, like, at least parents in the evenings can be like, all right, now's your Zoom time or whatever. Here's your screen time. A, we give parents a bit of a breather, and B is like, we find kids like even midday. Like I did a game group, right? Like we've been doing Smash Brothers for weeks, where we just make a Zoom call and you do a Smash Bros tournament online. We tried Jackbox games this afternoon instead, and we just had a riot. It was super fun. But all of it is just like you're on a Zoom call and you're just hanging out like midday. And I know parents are super grateful for it at this point, because they're like, well, they get a break from their siblings, or a break from us at least, and they get to interact with their buddies. Just doing stupid little things like, time wasters, I like to say, is just like giving them a break from not just learning and teaching, but like being able to build and harvest those relationships too. I like, even just doing these past couple games, I got to learn so much more about their personalities, and I've really enjoyed that with these students, that they've been able to like really come out of their shells. And it's like, I feel like they're starting to discover who they are as people. Whereas like when I was in high school, I don't know about the rest of us, but it's like, I feel like you tried out like 50 different personalities when you're in high school. And these students, they get this time now. The solitude seems like so bad, but at this point, like, they're like, oh, they get to discover who they are, and they're doing it not only through just the Bible, but interacting with like us personally, and like learning about themselves. So it's been I feel like this has like been so good in so many ways. It sucks, the circumstances suck, and I don't like seeing people sick and dying, but it's like, I feel like God's really using this time, whether people like to look at it in a positive note or not. His kids are coming together, I find, especially in our group, and in other youth groups I've seen it too. I've just been really, really interested in like seeing how this is turning out. And it just makes me think, I was just like, when we go back to normal, like, I don't know what our normal is going to look like. I think it's going to look something different, because this has been so good and so productive for us.
Well, I think it needs to. Like, if it doesn't look different, if we don't learn anything from this, it's wasted, and then it is just all bad. Um, but I think that like, if you right now are listening to this and all you think about this time is that, oh, I can't wait for this to go back to normal. This sucks. I can't wait to just go back to the way my youth group or church was before. You probably should just quit. Maybe that's a bit harsh, but you're not ready. Maybe don't quit, but prepare yourself. Like, because there is going to be changes, and it doesn't mean you have to run completely online church, but like, if your attitude is not willing to adapt and not willing to try new things and not willing to be uncomfortable, like, man, you don't, that's not what is going to move the needle in bringing a church that has been to this point declining and largely irrelevant in this nation. And we need to be able to do some different stuff. Is it any surprise to any of us, really, when we think of like the statistics on what churches reach into Canada was, and around whatever, maybe America, around the world, but I'm talking about Canada and Alberta, that it had been declining and frankly dying. And now God has taken an opportunity within chaos. I'm not saying he created it to do this, but he's taking the chaos and he's basically pushed us into a state of being uncomfortable and trying new things. And suddenly it's like, man, we've had this the whole time. If we're not willing to like work on new things and not just take the things we learned during COVID into the new reality, but also create a new attitude in our minds constantly of what's next, because Zoom has been around for years. Like, this
Oh
isn't
yeah.
new. Like Discord, kids have been online forever, but we still were so focused on that in-person model of church, and there will always be space for in-person. I believe that 100%. I think that that's always going to be community in person. You can't make anything better than that. But if we weren't willing in most cases to utilize these technologies, we were becoming the Blockbuster to Netflix. And we would say that, and we didn't know how to use that. But it's
Yeah.
the fact is we were becoming obsolete in some ways. But here we have all these tools that were right in front of our nose the whole time. I don't know how to get kids. I don't know how to get them to come to small groups. The timing doesn't work. They can't make it on Tuesday nights. Well, you had it. We all did. But we just weren't willing to be uncomfortable enough. So I think if we're willing to be uncomfortable and willing to take that attitude into the next phase, whatever that looks like, I'm not going to pretend like I know exactly what that looks like. But man, what an opportunity. And opportunities will always be there. The Holy Spirit is always giving us those opportunities. The Holy Spirit is always going to be driving us towards some things, but the Holy Spirit is going to bring us into places that are uncomfortable. It's not
Oh
always
yeah.
going to be easy. He doesn't just give you all, the Holy Spirit doesn't just give you all these great ideas and everything just comes together. You got to take some risks. The best things in my youth ministry, the times where we had the most kids coming out, the most kids engaged in a, discovering a Jesus-based life or taking it seriously, were out of crazy ideas that started as just things that were uncomfortable, or starting whole new programs or whole new nights of youth and just reworking it. Because if you're not trying new things, you will never have successes. And honestly, if you never fail, you'll never be tweaking enough to succeed.
Yeah, and that's the truth too. Because I always found, like, to be honest with you, before this even all happened, I think we changed our Friday night model youth like 3 or 4 times, because like, one, with City South Church, like, I think this is our first full. This was supposed to be our first full year of weekly programming.
Yeah,
Last year it was bi-weekly.
that didn't happen.
No, I was like, we couldn't even make it through a year. But I remember sitting, like, I only had 2 youth leaders last year, and then this past year we had like 8. So it's like we were constantly like growing and changing and putting in systems, and now it's like I feel like we just went straight back to like the beginning, and I was like, oh man, I remember just being so frustrated, being like, hey God, like, I really hate being uncomfortable, but I'm used to it at this point, because I'm just like, I know whatever he's doing, like, he just has to use me. And to be honest with you, if you look at it not just from like a mini ministry perspective, but like a whole perspective, because like our church, we were never online before. We didn't have, like, our website was like mediocre at best. It's still mediocre. I mean, we're a church of 3 people on staff, man.
The
So
politically
it's like
correct term is work in progress.
working in progress, sure. But like, we're a staff of 3, and we're using the resources that we can, right, that we can even afford. So it's like me and like our senior are like trying to piece together the website together, and trying to, like, we were trying to do the social media thing. I remember I was pushing for that, and they were like, like, we'll get to it, let's just focus on, like, how Sunday and stuff works. But now it went from being like, oh man, now we need all of this, like, it was a big scramble, and trying to learn how to do like even live stream services, and what the best system was. And I just remember there was a bit of a frustration between even all of us at one point. We're like, oh, why are we doing this? Like, this is so stupid. Like, if you look, like, there's so many other options. Like, we did the comparison thing. Like, not, I wouldn't say I remember I did it specifically. It was like, oh, there's these big churches in our city. They're doing it so well. Why would our our people want to do it. Like, I know there's the community and then there's the heartbeat of the church and things like that. But then you looked at the Facebook analytics, right, of doing the Facebook Live. That like blew us out of the water. We're just like, oh man, there was like 150 views on this video in one day. There was 300 people reached in one day. There was like 400 people that did a 3-second click in one day. We're like, oh man, like that's so worth it. Even if this was like the most garbage video put together with your cell phone on a live stream leaned up against a water bottle and the sound was awful. The fact is that like 300 people in that Millwoods area, because like it gives you the direct analytics, is like, yeah, it's so worth it. Like it's a grind all the time, and we always think that all of our stuff isn't good enough. But what I found, especially with my youth, like, man, how many times I feel like whenever we tried to do worship nights and they sucked, or like when we tried to do like big games and stuff like that, it's like the most mediocre things. Like I remember we made a mini golf course in our basement of our church. I bought putters at Value Village, and we just used crap that was all around the church. And I remember I bought like a really bad Don Cherry looking plaid vest jacket. And that was like the master's jacket that we gave to the kid with like
That's an awesome idea, actually. I love that.
I can't even take credit for it. Actually, him, Rye Federico, right? He's the one that did the Millwoods Masters over when we were volunteering at Millwoods, now Hope City. He did that, and it was like super fun. It was just a lot of setup and takedowns, so we only did it the one time just because there was like, there's only a couple of us leaders doing it, but that was Rye's idea, so I totally stole that. And I got to give him a shout out because like, I was like, whenever I had the opportunity to do it, I was like, guys, we're doing this. And my kids, like, they invited their friends out. It was like the easiest way to get people to invite each other out. It was super fun. So, but even with that, like the invite culture, it's super hard to get kids out for youth ministry. Sometimes when we want to do like the invite kind of things, like, oh yeah, bring your friends. Like some kids just don't want to do that. And those fun events, they get that opportunity to engage them, like you were saying earlier. But I found with this Zoom kind of thing, it's so much easier for my kids to be like, hey, we're going to do this like Jackbox game thing with the devotion. Do you want to come join us? And their buddies are like, yeah, sure. Like we've had growth happen on like our small groups, especially with like our baking night last night. We have girls that in our youth before, but they're joining our Zoom calls to come bake with my wife and I in our half-baked kitchen. Like, you know what I mean? Like we're in the middle of renos all the time, so nothing's ever put together, but like still it's just like, oh man, like we're still seeing like, growth from this too. So it's been good.
That's an interesting thing because we always think it's the big show or the big event that's going to drive, kids, unchurched kids coming into our groups. But what I think we're learning here, especially in this time with COVID of being stuck, is that content is everywhere. Community is hard to come by. And that's what I think I'm hearing there, is that people are, and students and all people, we're not desperate to find stuff like, I don't need, I work for a denomination, or sorry, a fellowship. If that's, we use the word fellowship, but really a denomination, of church. And my job is it's a coach, and it's expanded in the last little bit and taking on different things. So we're doing a bunch of stuff with social media and helping churches. So I see a lot of church. I don't need any more church content in my life. Let's just say that. Like I've got some banked hours of church content on social media. There's enough stuff out there. There's enough resources from our coaches that we found from all over the place that you can borrow, steal, whatever you want to call it, like worship sets and even sermons and video, like Bible Project videos they're not perfect, but they're pretty darn good. There's enough content. We don't need to be making much more content. I think that there's a space for that, and it's good to be creating your own video here and there. I think there's a couple churches in Calgary and Edmonton that have done a really good job of making youth content, but you don't need that. To be successful, what you need more than anything is to build community. And and to have a purpose behind it. Like games are great, but if you're just creating space to entertain, then you're just wasting your time. Like you need to have, and so then the next step, and this is something I was writing in a blog today about, what is the assimilation plan? Like how do you, in the same way that you would have an assimilation plan that, okay, a kid shows up for a fun event on a Friday at your church. Okay. And then what's next steps for them? Where's that next step across what I like to call the river, like to one side to the other, from unchristian to thriving Christian? Like, what are the stepping stones? What program is your fun night the first step? And then you try to ideal, and there's nothing's linear, nothing's always perfect. But like, what is that assimilation plan? If you don't have an assimilation plan in your online church the same way you would in person, if you didn't have it in person, you definitely need to get one now. But like, if you don't have an assimilation plan and it's just random and like a band-aid to get you over until you get into that space, dude, like, got to get on that. So like, and that's not easy. And that's something that if anybody has questions for, they can give me an email at jeff@abnwt.com, or phone me and whatever. I'm happy to help with that. That was probably the biggest turning point for my ministry. Was about 2 years in. I had tons of kids. We had like 150 to 200 unchurched kids coming in on a Friday, and we had a grade 8 small group, girl small group, grade 8 girl small group that had like 40, over 40. I can't remember how many it was, but we didn't have enough space, and it was great numbers, but we didn't have a plan on how to get them in. So we actually developed this whole, policy, procedure, system, structure, whatever term you want to use, to get them into that space. And nothing was perfect, but it definitely, we saw kids that are now actually planning to become pastors who were just community kids before. They're going to go to Vanguard next year in some form.
Oh man, that's amazing.
But it wouldn't have happened without an assimilation plan. Like, you can have 200 kids, but that was the most frustrating time of my life because we just couldn't get them in there. So,
Yeah.
So that's what I think is really important is thinking, if you're doing online, what is the next step? How do you get them to that next phase, that next ideal step in the process? Right, hitting my mic there. You know what I'm saying?
For us, what I've been trying to do, like, nothing's written in stone. Like, we're still trying to figure it out as we go on week to week. I mean, we just barely got online, but we're trying to do small groups and then do every once in a while do like a big meeting with like a lesson and a devotion. But I always try to sneak every time we do stuff together. It's like that community, that relation thing. Like you said, we don't want to do this whole entertainment culture, but we want kids to, like, be connected, and be like, oh, why do we do what we do? Like, what makes City South's church youth so, like, why do these kids keep coming back? And it's like, what's the attitude behind it? What's the thought? And we also put a lot of ownership on our students too. I told the students, like, my life verse, right? It's like Proverbs 27:17. It's like iron sharpens iron, like one man does to another, or one friend does to another, depending what translation you're looking at. And I was like, we try to encourage our kids, like, your walk with Jesus is pushing you to have others walk with Jesus, walking with you. And what I like to try and do is, I love relational ministry. That's like my heartbeat. Is like, that's why I love the smaller church. I don't think I can't say like confidently I would ever survive in a big church right away. Maybe somewhere down the line in my career, maybe. But right now, it's like I thrive off the small church based on the fact that I can be relational and intentional with my students, and that's like, being more personal with them. Like, yes, there's a big group plan, but like, it's me also actively pursuing individuals and being like, hey, how are you doing? Like, how's your week going? Like, showing them that we care, and like, knowing that there's a God out there that loves them, and then that there's like, Jesus died for your sins, and just continually pursuing that gospel message to them and relaying that all the time, and knowing that every time we got to be relaying the gospel as much as we can, just showing our students that, there's a reason to this. We're not just here to have fun. We're choosing this lifestyle. We're trying to show you guys that this is a solution to the problem. Like, this is the reason why you guys are trying to fill your lives up with so much stuff. Like, you shouldn't have to entertain yourself for 24 hours a day with constant content, like you were saying. But what's that relational piece coming along? What's connecting that bridge? So yeah, we do have those big events like the mini golf night, but it's like, hey, we try to bridge it. I remember learning this from even doing our workshops with you guys when we did our big church seminar, and like Jeremiah and your team came in, and I was like, what are those bridge events that you're making to? Like, yeah, let's invite you to this event, but what are we inviting you to after we're inviting you? Like, what's the next thing? So it's like always looking at your calendar and being like, yeah, we have small groups today, but next week we also have this going on and we'd really like you to be there, and just connecting them to try to get them into the youth group and like, being a part of our culture and like, connecting each other and connecting with other students.
It's great. And that's the right path, whether you're a big church or you're a small church. Being intentional about your processes is so important. Otherwise you can have, like I said, I had 200 kids coming out, but they weren't ever gonna, like, if there's no chance of them really plugging into a long-term Jesus-based life, like those are just numbers. It doesn't become value. And our numbers, once we got more effective, we still had a good amount of kids. Like, it was not much of a drop, but like we were probably closer to 130, 150 because we put more effort into the other areas. But we started seeing like it was productive in the right ways. So and that's a tough thing for a next gen leader to learn. It takes time. It's not something that they necessarily teach you in Bible college. I haven't been in
Yeah.
6 years, so maybe they are now. Hopefully they do, but I didn't. I just thought, I'm gonna make an event and it'll be fun, and then I'll preach and I'll dress well and get the same haircut as all the other youth pastors and get the same boots as them, and I'll be a cool youth pastor, and that's what's going to drive the growth in my group. Nothing against dressing well or whatever, but you know what I mean? Like, it was just be like other youth pastors. And so yeah, I guess to go back to kind of what we've talked about, you and me, before, like, we just need to be willing to try new things. That's really, if we're gonna kind of put a bow on this conversation, like, really, that's what I'm learning. That's what I've lived. That's where any success I've had and multiple failures have come from in ministry, is trying new things. And man, I'm thankful for the failures I had, because those failures, you just tweak every time. Jeremiah has this saying, for all of our churches, especially moving them online: tweak every week. And it's just, I know it's so lame to rhyme, but honestly, that's what it was. Everybody's like, well, that didn't work. So we'd sit down with our leaders. What can we do differently? How can we make it better? Do we scrap this? Do we tweak it? Do we just go all in on it and make it funnier because it was so bad? It's you got to reassess. So
going with that too, though, it's just like, you also got to be willing to cut things too. Like, I remember I was talking to some of my buddies that have been like, this is like out east, these guys, so it's like no immediate church we might know, but it's like, I remember one of them was telling me they had like still one of those old like phone in Bible lines kind of thing, and it was like a prayer call, but it was like a landline they had to the church. It wasn't like text or nothing.
Okay. This for a youth group?
Yeah, this is for a youth group.
Okay.
And it's like he had to like show the stats, being like to the one pastor, being like, we shouldn't be paying for this landline anymore. It's had one phone call in the past 6 years, and like he has to leave a voicemail on it every year, being like every couple weeks, sorry, not every year, every couple weeks, he's like, hey, just in case you want to be connected, my name is Pastor blah 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 blah, and here's like, but it's like, all right, what are you willing to cut? Like, is your program so sacred now that it's like, I have to try and replicate everything that I did on a Friday night to online, and that's just like, what compromises are you willing to make, right? Like, I don't know if other guys were struggling with this with me, but it's like first instinct was to like, oh, do we just take our Friday night and move it to an online platform and try to recreate it? Obviously we did that week one, that sucked. We're like, okay, then reinvent it. So it's like, with that failure, and you say tweaking every week, it's just like, what are you also willing to compromise in your programming, right? Like, are you willing to cut the things that aren't successful and just, take the loss? I know it's like honoring past planning and things like that. Like, it probably did serve a purpose and work at one time, but it's like,
I don't honor past. I honor people from the past. I don't honor programs. It doesn't mean that it wasn't good. I'm sorry, you just hit a nerve with me, because honestly,
I know.
Oh man, you just see my whole body on camera just jolt back. I don't have patience for it, because like, even if you had, listen, I got saved, to use an old-timey term. I became a Christian at a youth rally at Southside Pentecostal Church when I was going to Hope City's youth group when I was in grade 7, grade 7. And like, the band that was there was called Fat Fish with a PH. I just remember that. I thought they were cool. I had never heard of them before. the games we played were super lame. They did like and it wasn't why I accepted it, but they did like those old Heaven's Gate, Hell's Flames, like scare the Jesus India type of skit. Like, why didn't you tell me, as like the friend is being drug off to hell for after they crash in a drinking and driving accident? I wouldn't do any of that. That is the
No.
worst idea. Don't do that. That's a bad idea. But
see, yeah.
it was good for me. Whatever happened that night was good, but it doesn't mean that we need to like that type of stuff needs to stay, because just because you loved it when you were in youth or when you were a leader or when you first started pastoring, it doesn't mean it's what you need now. And it doesn't mean that it was any less valuable if you move on from it. But there is a culture in church sometimes that we need to honor the past. We honor people. We honor what happened in the past, but we don't live for the past. We live for those that don't yet know Jesus. Future tense. Like, that's
Exactly.
why the gospel is it's the gospel, and the church isn't for people that already have Jesus. It's for the future. It's for what we're working towards. And so yeah, you just got me really riled up. I'm getting preachy and angry now, but yeah, like, it's the most dangerous thing you can do in church is to just get so caught up in what was so good that you forget that, like, somebody had to be an entrepreneur to get to that point from a past place. And if you're not willing to do that, you're not going to reach people the same way that you were reached by that memory.
Yeah.
So
it's just, you got to pass the baton forward. Like, you got to know that, like, I benefited from the fact that I started my youth group. Like, my youth group kind of existed. So it's like anything that goes on, it's just like, when I leave here, it's just like, I know that, like, guys are going to be like, well, that's the way Matt did it. It's like, no. Just know that we had to try and fail so many times to get to the point where we're at. But that, like, when I eventually hand this ministry off to somebody, which, like, hopefully one day I will, I don't plan on being here until, like, I retire. But, like, still, I hope that the next youth pastor, the next gen person that comes along can just take it and run with it. Right. I never want them to be like, oh, we're going to have to do it the way everything was all the time. Like, I hope they don't have to go through a Corona experience to, like, have to shake up the way they do programming as well. Like, it'd just be good to see our church continually progress and continually, like, change and adapt to these situations. And I feel like maybe this season, right, people are like, this is a wake-up call for a lot of us, being like, oh, now we really need to look at our programming and people in our church. And we've even gone so far as sometimes, like, going through our roster of, like, people and be like cold calling them basically and being like, hey, how you doing? Haven't heard from you in a bit. And, like, I know you can't do that in a church when it's the size of, like, 1,500. Maybe you have small group leaders, or, like, there's way people can connect, but it's like in a church of, like, 130, like we are, or 100, 130, I don't even know where our numbers are at. We're able to just, like, pick up the phone and make sure I can call every one of my youth kids, or text or email or Instagram, and just make sure I touch base with just about every one of them if I can. Some of them are, like, impossible, and it's like you have to do, like, you become, like, dog the bounty hunter on trying to find down their social media and just be like, hey, how are you doing? Like, are you still connected? Like, can you come connect with us on Zoom, or come be a part of our online, like,
yeah.
So it's just, it's just hoping that people can, like, let those sacred cows die.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, we should wrap this up. We're probably somewhere around 45 minutes, which is more than I usually go for on this, but it's a good conversation. So, yeah, if
well, I also got
anybody's
you fired up there, so.
Well, yeah, that generally happens. You just have to say something. That's how I work. So if anybody, before we say goodbye, if anybody wanted to get a hold of you, or is there a social media that you'd like to plug? You got I always ask if since you're a youth pastor, if there's a clothing line that you started or something like that you want to plug.
No, I don't start no clothing lines. My wife gets most of my stuff from, like, Winners and Plato's Closet. I'm wearing my bear archery hat that I got for free with my compound bow. So yeah, I was like, I'm budget youth pastor. I'm a two kind of jobs. But if you want to get a hold of me, I'm matt@citysouthchurch.com for my email, or you can hit me up on Instagram. It's Matt_Kofler, KOFLER_33. On Instagram. That's pretty much my two major ones. I'm still on Facebook for you older guys. mainly for the
Hey,
parents of connecting.
Facebook actually stats are right now, not to start another rant, but there's actually more teenagers. Teenagers are migrating back to Facebook.
Oh yeah,
Oh
I
yeah.
never knew that.
Yeah, it's a little different, but it is still the most. I think it was something on over 75% of pastors. Over 75% of Gen Z are actually on Facebook on at least once a week. So that's
Probably
interesting.
probably on the buy and sell, trying to find Nintendo Switches right now. That's like the underground hot commodity.
That and bicycles. Bicycles, there's like none anywhere. Everyone's like, oh, we're gonna buy bicycles because we're stuck outside. Or that we're stuck inside. Like I just bought a bike, but I'll probably use it because I live in the River Valley. But in like 5 months, you want a cheap bike, go on Kijiji. People are gonna do it for two weeks and be like, I'm sweaty, this sucks. And maybe they don't love it. So anyways, that's great. So that's your Instagram, your email. So that's probably figure if you want to check out the church, it's City South Church. You can find that obviously by Googling it. You don't have a MySpace or anything like that you want to plug?
Oh man, I don't even want to know what my MySpace looks like. That was made in like
2007, 2008. Yeah.
Oh, it's probably got nothing but Linkin Park and like, Blank 182 all over it. So.
That just sounds like my Spotify still to this day. So.
Oh no, that's my Spotify 100%. So.
It's all good. All right, well, let's wrap it up. Thanks for being here with us, and super excited to see what goes on down there at City South in the future here.